And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Coalition Radio Network. Here at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, our old mothership at coalitionradio.us, and of course, all our newer material, as well as the written word, can now be found at coalitionradionetwork.com. Well, joining me this evening is someone who now officially qualifies for repeat offender status. Attorney Sonia Dio joined us, probably about a year and a half or so ago to discuss an ongoing situation with Rhode Island state law, which essentially renders anyone serving a life term as, dead. We'll talk a little bit about that, but what really ripped our heart out, and I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here, is a situation that has, I guess it's been evolving now for a while. It came to our attention earlier this week with the filing of a lawsuit by the American Civil Liberties Union, and Sonia Dio, attorney, as one of the two primary attorneys, regarding the situation of a young man. This young man was born on the streets of Providence, if you will, attended LaSalle for high school, and then is a graduate of our very own Johnson & Wales University with a degree in criminal justice. He then went on to pursue a dream. And sadly these days, it seems like too many dreams are being dashed. Not just for reasons of the dread COVID, not just for this apocalypse shutdown that we're experiencing, but because of the, mean-spiritedness is probably too light a word. The abuse of power by individuals for whom they see the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island as their own personal playground. And individuals who are seeking to establish themselves as young people, whether it be through political activism or, in this case, attendance at the police academy, people who are young people establishing really to following their dreams. For them, this is nothing more, nothing less than cannon fodder for their everyday amusement. So we brought to the attention a case of one Michael Clark. Again, this young man attended Providence Police Academy, and we'll discuss tonight the range of abuses that he suffered for being black, for being a person of color, for being a Christian, for someone who enjoys rap music, like just about every kid of every color, of every city, it would seem like, under the age of about 25 or so, maybe even 30 at this point. And for all of that, he was sentenced to, if you will, an experience that involved pain, humiliation, hazing in some of the worst formats I've ever seen. And ultimately, despite a lifetime of work for a young man, despite all the dedication one can imagine to the pursuit of a goal, that goal was ripped from him. It goes without saying that these are terrible circumstances at any time in our recent or not so recent history. But the sheer lack of regard, the utter depravity of individuals associated with and or the Providence Police Department in putting this young man through this at a period of time when we should be celebrating his successes, not because he's joining the police, but simply because here's a young man born of Rhode Island who has a track record and a dedication to those causes and becoming so close to actually not just acting on it, but realizing his dream. Sonia Dio, attorney, welcome back to the Coalition. Thank you for joining us tonight.
How are you, Pat?
Well, it's disheartening, and again, I'm trying to tone down the rhetoric for once. I think you and I have spoken on a number of occasions, and when it's not so toned down, and a number of emotions come to mind as I read through the case paperwork: revulsion, repulsion, anger, frustration. It's the year 2020. You're talking about an urban police department that is under a great deal of stress for a number of reasons, not the least of which is their track record within the community with which they seek to govern. How does this happen?
Well, you know I can't answer that, don't you?
I'm gonna leave that hanging out there. What can you tell us
Yeah.
though about the case?
Here's what I'm going to tell you about Michael Clark. What isn't readily apparent from the pleadings is that this guy is a minister. You have to understand, this gentleman gets all of this education. He is highly dedicated to his faith. He creates a number of, well, at least 2 videos, one of which it's rap, but it is Christian rap.
Right.
This is not, any sort of, I don't even know how to put it. It's not degradatory rap. It's not young men running around talking about drugs and drinking beer and shooting up places and all of that.
None of the misogyny.
This is Christian rap. And if you've not listened to Christian music, then you might not know what that is. But there's just nothing offensive about what he put together. Mm-hmm. First day at the academy, he walks in and is told to put a do-rag on his head and rap this song for the officers. And, repeatedly told to rap for them, and it just gets worse from there. I am from a military background, and I get this idea that the academies are paramilitary backgrounds and activities, but this is not right. And that's just the get-go. I can't get past the fact that this kid is a minister. I can't get past the fact that he's not really standing out there and saying, the police are horrible or any of those things. He, in his song, goes ahead and talks about how as a young black man, his, brothers are getting shot, and basically asks for God to intervene on that. And this is what this kid faces when he goes to the department to learn how to be a police officer, to serve his community, to try to fix this. This whole sort of having more blacks on the force and having better integration in the community and being able to serve.
And a young man comes along who sees the police. My take, I had the opportunity to join the press conference earlier this week, folks, and we shared both the video, and we will reshare the video along with the video of this conversation. But tell me if I'm off base. My take is that he sees his ministry as the streets of Providence and young people who are challenged in so many different ways in the streets of Providence, and sees as an extension of his ministry the ability to serve as a police officer and bring, if you will, for lack of a better word, righteousness to the streets.
His ministry isn't so limited. I agree with everything you say. Mm-hmm. That was part of what he wanted to do. But in addition to being a police officer, he also wanted to be able to do his ministry on the side. Mm-hmm. But that was his goal. I'm astonished. This was not a kid who came in with bad motive. I don't even understand. And
a young man who had spent literally what some would pass as his teenage years, seemingly with a single-handed dedication to the pursuit of this dream, in a way that you just don't see all the time.
His whole plan was to come back and work as a cop in Providence. This is what this kid wanted to do. And I keep saying he's a kid. I mean, he's in his early 20s. But to already have faced this, and he's been clear, he certainly would not be a part of the Providence Police Department at this time. And I believe he's got his misgivings about being a police officer in any department.
And I don't blame him, obviously. He takes the very worst, if you will, of the police state here in Rhode Island with him as a very, very personal memory. So, and again, there are areas that you can't broach because of the ongoing nature of the litigation and your relationship with him as one of his primary attorneys. So please we're out of bounds. I have no doubt, having spoken with you many times now, that you'll tell me exactly where I'm out of bounds. But let's talk about, if you will, the process of becoming a Providence police officer. Typically, right now, do you have a handle, if you will, on what skills and what level of education they're looking for in an ideal circumstance?
Okay, well, that's not a fair question. The better question, or I think the answer to your question, phrased a different way, would be that most police departments want somebody that has at least an associate in criminal justice. A lot of the state departments, meaning the municipalities in the state, are requiring at least a 4-year degree. My understanding is that because of the screening process and the things that Providence does with bringing people onto its force, that may not be a requirement. Now, I was told that, so that's all I'm saying. I don't have that paperwork in front of me. But it's not as if he is allowed to become a Providence police officer, or anyone's allowed to become a Providence police officer without going through a real screening process. They do a background check. They find all of the information on people to make certain that they would be good fits. There's a psychiatric component to that. So I think that generally answers your question.
Right. And have you had an opportunity for this class to understand how many applicants, or generally speaking, I'll keep it very general because I guess we need to do that. Typically, how many applicants does a city like Providence, or in the case of Providence, see for, in this case, roughly how many slots were actually open to ultimately be sworn in as a Providence police officer?
I don't know how many applicants, and I don't know how many members. I am sorry. If I went outside, I could pull my binders and I could tell you that.
Okay,
I don't. It's numerous. It's not like 5. It's more than 20 that are in a class. I just can't answer your question. Okay.
So as far as the time period involved in the class, we're talking about young people who report to duty essentially 5 days a week, and then 4 days a week. Okay. And then are they staying at the academy? Is it an around the clock experience, or are they given the opportunity to go home?
No, they go home. This gentleman would have been at the academy, or he started the academy first week in January, and would have been graduating had he been allowed to in June. I think it's the first week in June he would have graduated. One of the things that we talk about in our complaint, and my understanding, is that part of the issue with him leaving the academy and going home is that they were following him, and they were monitoring what he was doing on the weekend, and they were asking him those sorts of things. And, there's sort of numerous instances where he gets given a really hard time for things that they had observed him doing while he wasn't at the academy.
And is that often the case? I mean, are they putting a tail, if you will, to use the vernacular, on young people who are attending the academy? I mean, what would generate that type of? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not aware of that happening in any other academy class.
Right.
And I can take guesses why, but it's not. That's why I'm here, right? That's why we're talking discrimination. That's why we're talking First Amendment retaliation. My belief is that's why, but I till the case is done and a jury finds it, that's just my belief, isn't it?
Do you maintain, or is it appropriate to discuss the notion that his sheer involvement in Christian rap might have been a precipitative factor in this type of attention? I'm trying to understand how he's different, other than being a really dedicated young man. How there are plenty of young people out there who are Christians and are very active Christians. here in Providence and everywhere. What is there any feeling that you can discuss why this is so different? Why they latched onto this apparently?
What I can tell you is that what we have pled is this idea that it was his activism in the Black Lives Matter context, including what was stated in some of his songs, don't shoot, things like that to the cops,
Mm-hmm.
which resulted in this retaliation against him. Um, I am certainly going to ask questions that go into the idea that it might be pertaining to religion. But as of right now, that's not pled.
Right.
We plead what we think we can prove. We don't plead what could possibly be proved.
Right. And so the officers named in the complaint are specifically the administration, if you will, of what's referred to as the 69th Providence Police Academy. And particularly in the case of Captain Kevin Lanny, he is being sued, if you will, both in his individual capacity and his official capacity. Now, stepping back, excuse me, from this particular case, is it fairly typical in a municipal workplace discrimination lawsuit to be able to sue them both in their personal and their official capacity?
Well, let me explain that to you. Okay, when I'm suing a municipality for injunctive relief, I want them to change what they're doing. In some instances, I'm looking for anything other than money. You sue in an official capacity. You might also be suing in an official capacity if, in some odd instance, you have a systematic problem, which may exist here, where the leadership knows all of this is going on and fails to take action to change it, not as it pertains to a particular person, but as it pertains to the people that it's bringing in. So that's sort of the official capacity basis for the suit. The individual capacity suits are based on intentional actions, with a finding that they've deliberately violated the law, that they violated a known law, that they've intentionally done that, or at least recklessly done that. So they themselves should be personally liable for it. So that's the difference between the two capacities.
Mm-hmm. And how strict is the court, if you will, in allowing the case individually to go and again, I'm talking in the generic here. For a case against someone who is a municipal employee to be taken on directly because of all the different protections government employees have against personal lawsuit, how tough is it, generally speaking, to be able to pursue the case against them personally?
Well, I can tell you that there are a lot of cases that are dismissed out on summary judgment or even on a motion to dismiss for what we call qualified immunity grounds, which is where you can't either plead or prove up an intentional action, or that the individual knew that they were violating what is black and white law. And that happens a fair amount. And what are the percentages on that? I mean, I think it depends on your facts. We're talking about retaliation for exercise of free speech in making the videos and writing the songs. And, the law is crystal clear that you can't retaliate against somebody for doing something like that, particularly before they are members of a public body. And in this instance, this was all done well before he became a member of the academy.
In your pleadings, everyone seems to agree that the young man was very forthcoming in conversations about his past life. Was that, in terms of his background check, and also, I would imagine, the type of regular, and maybe even somewhat invasive because of the nature of the job, interviews that take place about one's personal life. How did, in fact, they discover, or is it known how they discovered, in this case, his videos?
I don't know. I do know they did discover it. I do know that, although it's not pled in our complaint, he had been warned that this was going to happen before he walked in the academy.
So, and again, my words, not yours. As an outsider, and I'm not an expert, I simply try to play one on the radio, it would appear that there was an element of possibly being set up. The question begs, if in fact they found this to be an overwhelming negative, why was he accepted in the first place? And I'm not agreeing with him, by the way, that this was an overwhelming negative. I mean, if this was in fact, they see this as a character flaw, why wasn't that discussed? Why wasn't that noted ahead of time? Is there any? Oh, okay.
I don't know, right? I don't know. I do know, and I would rather not get the individual in any sort of trouble at the moment. But I will say that before he started the academy, he had been forewarned that they were looking at these videos and that they were going to come out. I will say that my theory, and again, a jury decides what a jury decides ultimately if we get there. And nobody's got to take my word on it. That's what we've got juries for. But my theory is that this idea that he was writing music, that he was engaged in doing videos, and that he was calling out police officers for violence against blacks and predominantly black men, was not something that the individuals at the academy wanted to have represented amongst the police officers who graduated from the academy.
Wow. And this, and again, this is not a reflection on your case, but just commenting on recent history, there have been occasions where there were people who had actually committed low-level crimes and were, with full knowledge, accepted into the academy and were actually in the academy and performed, went off the reservation, as they say, while they were at the academy. And it took heaven and earth to remove them.
On that point, I mean, the police selection is the police selection. Is my best police officer, could it possibly be somebody that's committing some of these low-level crimes and has reformed? That's possible. No one's saying that the person who is a criminal might not be the best to figure out who's a criminal. Mm-hmm. But I am saying that this is just a little different. This isn't that.
Now, when you're in an academy environment, you are given routine assessments. And yes. because ultimately, at some level, in military terms, sometimes use the word rift. In other terms, well, every Hollywood movie and every real situation has got a term for those folks who are removed from the situation. Was he, in fact, being fairly graded on an ongoing basis? Or was this a situation potentially where no matter what he did, he was going to receive low assessments?
Well, so I think Mr. Clark was performing adequately academically, mm-hmm. and that he was performing adequately physically. But he was subjected to a number of different additional academic assignments that we would say were for random reasons, but we believe are retaliatory, and that he was tossed out because of the number, I believe they call it demerits that he received. Mm-hmm. So, I guess he was doing adequately other than that. And that's what we're arguing is that but for we'll be arguing is that but for him being thrown out for the demerits that weren't really related to his performance, he would have done fine and graduated the academy.
Right. So again, I'll just put this out there as a purely rhetorical question. If in fact the fix was in, why did they choose to put this young man through this? Because there are also allegations of not only just mental abuse in terms of putting him out there, making him perform, putting him out there with additional workloads that the rest of the class was not getting, and excessive workloads. There are also allegations of physical abuse, aren't there?
Yeah. I want to justify all of this. When I first saw this, I wanted to justify all of this based on sort of my military mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went through basic training. I've been through extensive training with that. And, we were all hazed. I mean, we don't call it hazing, but, the thought that goes through my head is front lean and rest position, and being banged on the head with an M16 at some point because I wasn't enough of a screw up, right? So I think that part of it was sort of what they do, but I think this went well outside of those bounds.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the same person that decides he goes to the academy that allowed this to go on. We don't know. We've got discovery to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to tell you, as a person, I am more conservative. I want to know what the facts are. I want to see, ultimately what the discovery shows. I just am, I can take it almost with a grain of salt that to a certain level, this is part of what a paramilitary organization looks like and how it might affect a particular individual. But this is well over the top.
Well, and looking at your perspective as an attorney in this situation, your military background is ideal because you've got a clear understanding from possibly even both sides of the equation, what happens during a typical training environment, what needs to happen, and sometimes what happens and probably shouldn't. It really is there will be no moments where what's the retort? You can't handle the truth. Your career, your career, quite honestly, lends itself very well to this type of oversight. And sadly, it's clear from the type of anecdotal evidence that I get because I'm active in local politics and I work with a number of different communities that this is not potentially maybe in the case of a training academy, but clearly in terms of what goes on every day in the streets of Providence and in the streets of other towns across this nation, these are not singular events. So I applaud your ability to take your background and employ it fairly, and that's the sense I get that you're taking to this.
Hold on, I'm not here to employ anything fairly. I'm here to advocate for a client.
Right.
I am in my mind looking at what a jury might think.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have a certain amount of military members that are going to be a part of our jury pool if we get that far. Right. And that's sort of something, I guess when I'm doing a calculus, that's kind of what I'm thinking is I need to make certain if we try this case that I get to every one of them jurors and that I'm able to adequately portray what happened and disavow their notion that it might just be because that's how a paramilitary organization works. I think that's where it's helpful.
Right, and I'm going to read from your complaint. Costa, who is one of the officers, approached the plaintiff during the second or third week of the academy and told plaintiff that plaintiff had a effing attitude. Paraphrasing, obviously. Costa told plaintiffs he did not like him and that Costa, did not think plaintiff should be in the academy. Costa told plaintiff he could build a case full of demerits to get you thrown out of the academy. Costa then twice repeated to plaintiff, "You know I have the power to do that, right?" That's an exchange that is actually right out of a movie script.
Well, it's right out of Michael Clark's experience. It's not a movie script, but yes.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking officer or gentleman. Louis Gossett Jr. And when I say that, I'm not trying to trivialize that. It's when we go to the movies and we see these things, we don't think that these extreme characterizations or caricatures actually take place. But those words jump off the page at me and grab me by the throat. I'm thinking the pure terror and frustration that Mr. Clark must have felt when he's hearing those words coming from the head of an organization that he wants to belong to? How can that not influence his future decisions?
Well, but particularly with all of the things that had happened to him before that point, right? I mean, if you take one thing out of context, and the story I can tell you is, honest to God, I was qualifying with an M16 in a foxhole, and I had this drill instructor come up and bang me on the head with his M16 and start screaming at me because I wasn't enough of a screw up, right? Not the language he used. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of that, but when you're looking at everything together, it doesn't appear as if this was just a paramilitary environment where, they decided to tell him that on one day to try to motivate him or whatever. This is an ongoing saga that went on for my client from, January, I think it was 5th, until he was thrown out the end of May.
During the first week of February 2019, plaintiff was given a homework assignment to write a paper about the number of black people shot by police. No other recruit was assigned this task or a similar task.
Don't
now,
you?
Holy cow.
Don't you? No, I mean, hey, why not? I don't. Here's the deal. Michael Clark really hesitated on bringing this suit forward. And I have to say that I am impressed by who he is because he's willing to do this in this environment.
Plaintiff was required to write a letter to the Providence Police Department apologizing for his music videos, at least one of which was performed in the spirit of the Black Lives Matter movement, and explaining that he now understood the sacrifice made by police officers. Plaintiff wrote this letter. No other recruit was assigned this task or a similar task. Let's be blunt. I'm a older than middle-aged white dude from the burbs, all right, who grew up in the mean streets of New Jersey, and I'm being facetious. So I don't have a lifetime of experience of dealing with what is now believed to be, in many municipalities and many city streets, this type of cumulative psychological terror that was analyzed, if you will, by our own Federal Department of Justice in analyzing the Ferguson, Missouri riots in a pretty in-depth study. So if I'm repelled by that type of confession, it strikes me as sort of a Providence version of a young officer in the Vietnam War being forced to confess to the crimes of America. I mean, who the hell comes up with this shit?
I don't know, but I want to be clear about something, right? Mm-hmm. And it is not anyone's contention that every officer on the Providence Police Department has these views. It is not our contention that there aren't a lot of officers doing everything they can to be good and decent people. But it is our contention that these things happened. And I will tell you, as Whitey McWhitester, as I often refer to myself with black clients, I don't understand this. I don't get it. I have not been subjected to this. Mm-hmm. All I can do, at least in this incident, is to try to bring forth Mr. Clark's story and to paint that as well as is possible for a jury, which, chances are in this area is not going to have a lot of minorities or blacks on it. That's just the way our jury pool is.
Right. Let me just throw out one or two other things that, and I guess in this one example that you've got published in the complaint seems to really straddle that line between popularized versions of military academies or paramilitary forces and then where you go over the line. One Detective Pineda told the plaintiff that he would be a turbo officer and that he doubted the plaintiff would make it through the academy. All right, anyone who's been through military service has heard that one before. All right, that's you're all terrible human beings until one day you're not. During this time, though, however, a Sergeant Ramazzi, forgive me for that, told the plaintiff he was going to be in jail in 3 years because he did not remember things well and claimed that plaintiff would be a liar. And they sought to ostracize the plaintiff as fellow recruits by requiring the fellow recruits write up plaintiff for his alleged infractions. So, again, I'm not a veteran. I did not serve in the armed forces. But my notion, and again, keeping this in the abstract, is that by engaging in that divisive behavior, aren't you in fact defeating the entire notion of the training, which is to create a level of loyalty in the field, a level of cohesion, and a level, if you will, automatic reaction to rise to the defense of other people who are engaged in difficult or life-threatening situations? Isn't that against the very spirit of a police academy?
I want to agree with you, but I'm not going to. I think that, everything that is put together in our complaint comes to a picture of an environment that I do not believe that Mr. Clark should have ever been subjected to, that we have alleged is racially tainted, that is that he was subjected to because he exercised his First Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you're going to have a paramilitary.
Well, we lost you there for a second. Oh, you're back.
All right. Are there
Don't
instances where you're going to have a paramilitary organization engaged in that sort of behavior with somebody to try to get them to conform to the norm and go along with the rest of recruits? I think it's possible.
I would imagine, and again, this is where we get into, you're on the onset to this case in one respect, so it's difficult to say this. Let me phrase it this way. I would imagine part of the research involved in this will be looking at similar academies throughout the country, not just for these situations, but for example, the absence of certain best practices, which I would have thought would have been observed everywhere, which was written guidelines, written training manuals, written, behavioral requirements, the type of things that we take for granted right now, according to your complaint, don't seem to exist here. If in fact you're going to hold people to a high level, they should know at least whether you're an employee or attending a paramilitary academy here. You need to understand, if you're being held to a high bar, what that bar is. And that doesn't seem to exist here. The final thing, and again, this is not supposed to be for shock, but some of it is. In your complaint, you talk about a taser incident during taser training. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to folks what happened there?
He was forced to endure much more of a severe taser shock than the rest of his class. As I recall, he was shot in the back and was left there for a period of time, which was very different than what the rest of his class experienced.
So, and he, as a result, actually suffered physical injuries as a result of this.
Yeah.
In one line you say plaintiff was singled out to be the only recruit to be continually tased while having to crawl across the floor. Mm-hmm. Throughout the academy, plaintiff was treated as a suspect, a criminal, and a defendant, and not like a recruit. Other recruits were not treated in this manner.
Other recruits were certainly not treated in this manner. How you want to characterize that and how we characterize it in the complaint is sort of how we do things. Is a jury going to believe that? Does the city of Providence agree with that? I think the answer to both of that is the city doesn't agree, and hopefully a jury will.
You talk about the command staff, and again, the parallels are astonishing. the complaint alleges that the command staff was aware of the ongoing harassment of the plaintiff, and that it all had to do with stereotyping and the complainant's prior behavior, which, by all accounts, were simply limited to his performance of some Christian rap songs. Again, going back to the original interview process, it was dictated and detailed that the plaintiff met all psychological qualifications and was clearly a person of good character. They're roughly their words. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. So, again, rhetorical question number 50. How does the head of an ongoing educational paramilitary training facility in the year 2020 allow this to happen? And this is set against normal times.
Yeah.
In the last few weeks alone, we've had many riots break out between Providence police and members of I'll just call them communities of color. I was there for them. This is not just some hearsay. I was actually right in the middle of it, reporting on it. Again, I'll just say this. Are people confused as to why members of this community feel like they're under attack, under siege, and being singled out? That's my words. When something like this is stipulated to. Right, not yours.
Yeah, but here's the deal, right? This was something, and boy, I'm not, how do I do this? And not come across the wrong way. This is honest. This is something that's timely, given that we've just had all of this happen in Providence. These were events my client went through a year before. Mm-hmm. So, as I'm seeing it, this seems to be something that is ongoing, that's been ongoing for a while. How do you allow it to happen? How do you justify it to happen? How do you do all of those things? Well, I don't know. I don't know what will prove out of all of this that happened. We have proof of a lot of things. Ultimately, juries are triers of fact. I'll keep saying that. This is a horrible situation that my client went through.
And he deserves the full protection of the law at this moment. And I congratulate you for, again, I've said this before, in some of the most difficult situations imaginable, lawyers working on behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union continue to dive into the fray. And I'm grateful for you spending time tonight. This was a difficult conversation. More really from my perspective, because I understand that you've got a responsibility first and foremost to your client, and not to discuss something that might harm his quote unquote position. And you're willing in this to tackle it must be a relief sometimes when a lawyer / reporter / activist interviews you, as opposed to somebody who's probably watched too much TV. It's because of these difficult issues. Everything that I ask through my naivete, simply as a local activist, wanting to understand a situation that seems so incredibly wrong. How's that for a florid description? Wrong. It just is beside himself, trying to understand why and how. And ultimately, that will be one of the purposes of both discovery and hearing, the actual hearing that takes place in front of a judge. What is the physical process going forward now? You've engaged with the lawsuit. I would imagine discovery is the next part. And then what is the process from there?
Well, so back it up. We got to serve the suit. The city of Providence, one of their attorneys, will accept service for Chief Pear and the city. Beyond that, we still have to serve the complaint on the officers that are otherwise named. Once that happens, we'll have a conference, then we'll do some discovery. Then we'll start doing some depositions, and I assume they'll file a motion for judgment as a matter of law. It's a summary judgment motion. I believe we will win on that, and then we'll go, and if we can't resolve it, we'll have a jury trial.
And I'll just comment editorially that that's a jury trial that could, given these type of conversations, tear the city apart. But it needs to happen.
Look, none of us can foresee the future, and I want a favorable resolution for my client, right? Mm-hmm. I think these are incredibly important issues. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be working with the ACLU on this case or any of the rest of them. But ultimately, we will see what will be. There may be major changes before we ever get to a jury trial. One never knows. And we can always hope that the good that exists is the good that comes through, and that, we get to a resolution that helps address some of these issues without ever getting to that trial.
What's been the reception so far in the community as these revelations have started to come out? Has there been any sort of shock registered in the community, or are you sensing that people knew this was going on, and they're just ready to finally bring this out on a bigger stage?
Other than dealing with you, the media, and doing a deposition or two in the last couple of days, I haven't talked to anybody. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I haven't walked down the street and had anybody stop me yet.
Okay. And currently, your client now is involved in the ministry. Tell us a little bit what he's doing right now, if you don't mind, in terms of overall work.
He preaches. Oh, what is he doing for work? He's been doing security work. He's also been working a lot. More recently, more than the security work, with his church. He's working with all sorts of families with the COVID-19, with the restrictions. He actually is working on putting together, I don't want to call them best practices, but that's a word you use, but putting structure in place for his church to help protect the members. Mm-hmm. And he's doing a lot of things to try to increase his education in that area. We've been talking about him, going and trying to get a master's divinity. So he's very, very active in those areas. There's no question. That is, he feels very, very strongly about that devotion.
And so, rather than, and I will never begin to understand how he feels truly personally about these situations. I'll never be privy to that. But at least in his day-to-day life, rather than be bitter, rather than retreat, this young man continues to shine by advocating ever more strongly for his ministry and for his beliefs.
Yeah, and to be clear, he was very hesitant about bringing this forward. There was legit discussions about whether he wanted to do this. And then a delay of, a period of time before he decided he would. He did not, how do you want to say, he didn't want to be the poster child. He did not.
Right.
He decided he had to.
Because clearly this behavior at this moment in history, with all of other complications exacerbating what are clearly obvious tensions in the community, this behavior has to stop.
Yeah.
And I'm Captain Obvious here. That seems, wow, Pat, you're that's deep, but it's the bravery of one young man who withstood all this, still continued to fight for the pursuit of his career until it was, in my words, stolen from him, and then continues to work for the community. Possibly the biggest tragedy here, when you transcend the personal ramifications, obviously, is that we'll never have an opportunity to understand what Mr. Clark's role could have been as a Providence police officer. Could he have been that true peace officer that people often talk about in their fantasies? Could he have been that young man, as he grew older within the policing community, made, if nothing else by example, substantive changes in the tenor of the conversation between a clearly enraged activist community, a clearly enraged community itself, and the rest of the state, the rest of Rhode Island. We'll never know that now, will we?
Yeah, right. But, people are changed by the situations they're put through. And Mr. Clark, if I have any predictability of the future, will continue to be a leader in this community. He will use these events and the things that he went through to be more effective in advocating within his community. And he will make lemonade out of the proverbial lemons. He is, when I say he is a man of God, I mean that.
That came right through. Even in the few minutes that where he was having a conversation with folks at the press conference, that just blew right through. It was clearly obvious. Well, tell us briefly before we sign off for the night, Sonia Deal, attorney. As always, you've got a legal practice. Tell us briefly about some of the other work that you do and how folks can reach out to you in the community for legal representation.
Sure. I am an employment discrimination civil rights lawyer, working on a lot of matters for employees right now, a couple of smaller employers. I'm at 395 Smith Street, phone number 401-864-5877, and I am at the-straight-shooter.com.
Excellent. So do you typically advocate for employees, or do you typically work on behalf of an employer?
My practice is generally for employees.
Okay.
I do some prisoner work too. Not that I particularly want to advertise that, but I do some of that. I'm not looking for everybody at the prison to start calling me, but for the most part, I have some small businesses. I like working with small businesses, but generally it's employees.
Excellent. Well, as always, our best wishes to you and to the entire, if you will, family of ACLU lawyers who work diligently on behalf of the little guy or the little gal who take on unpopular cases sometimes, take on wildly popular cases that might be popular for all the wrong reasons. It's got to be a calling when I see the type of dedication folks like you have towards the practice of the law, and it's clear that Rhode Island would be a lesser place if it weren't for you and a number of attorneys that we've been blessed to meet here on the coalition. So if you could wish Mr. Clark nothing but the best. We are astonished even in our briefest moments in talking with him at his maturity, at his vision, not only for himself but for his community, and the bravery that it takes to put oneself, in the line, if you will, by pursuing this type of litigation. This will be life-changing for him, hopefully mostly for the good, but we all know that there's always maybe a little baggage that comes along with this as he becomes more widely known to the Rhode Island community. But we wish him nothing but the best, and as well for you. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks.
We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network here at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalition_radio. We'll be, over the next day or so, pulling together this conversation, the video that the ACLU is kind enough to provide to us of Mr. Clark performing, the material surrounding the case, the pleading, all into one little package, if you will, and we'll be putting that in a prominent place at coalitionradionetwork.com. To whatever degree made possible by his attorneys and or circumstances, we will continue to follow this very, very closely, hopefully in a responsible manner based solely on the dissemination of facts and information, minus what we always refer to in our opening statements, minus the outrage porn that sometimes can go along with a case just like this. That's all for tonight, folks. Sonia Deal, attorney at law, thank you for joining us, and to all, a good evening.